Good morning. Welcome back. I hope everyone had a wonderful Yom Tov holiday. We begin our journey, the Yaakov Halach Darkei, as the expression that is used after the holiday season, that we go and enter into so-called the routine world, routine life. So we continue our journey in Hemshech Ayin Beis, the conclusion, reviewing the conclusion of Ayin Beis. And where did we leave off before Yom Tov? We left off on page, I believe, page 1406, Aleph Tov Vav, 1406. So let's review what we learned, and we'll continue on. So as I've mentioned a number of times, we learned this already once, through till the end of Ayin Beis. But considering that the Rebbe Rashab did not finish the Hemshech, which is clear from the fact that he does not answer some of the questions that he posed, as well as finish certain themes that he began. So we went back to learn the source material of a big part of this Hemshech, this end of the Hemshech, which is namely the Maimer Mika Hashem Elokeinu HaMakbil L'Shavas in Tehiru from the Alter Rebbe, and its beard, its explanation, plus the Mittler Rebbe's elaborate discussion on the same Maimer, Mamori Ad Muram Tzoi. So coupled with that, as well as some other source material that I've been pointing out throughout, the Maimer Beinenu Me'ires from the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, and other material, we are able to piece together, firstly, the bigger context and picture of Ayin Beis, as well as be able to put together what would have been most likely the answers to the questions and the conclusion of the themes discussed, because in the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, and especially in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, it's discussed at length, and the questions are asked and they're answered. So thank God we don't have to guess, because we have those clear answers, and it's very clear that the Rebbe Rashab based his material on it. Firstly, he cites it, and secondly, he actually quotes pieces, as I pointed out, and we'll point out as we continue on. But centrally, generally the key points that to keep in mind is that we're learning about Torah. In contrast to Tefillah, which is primarily a Mamata Lamaila interface, from the bottom up Tefillah, the person, the Mispalel, the person praying, initiates and reaches and longs to reach the divine. Torah is the divine speaking to us. Hashem gave us the Torah, so it's primarily a Mamayla Lamata experience. Even though it has, and both of them have overlap, Tefillah has Mamayla Lamata and Torah has Mamat Lamayla, like we learned. There is in Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud. Talmud is far more Mamat Lamayla in Torah itself. But it's still based on what Moshe gave us from Hashem at Sinai, both the principles, the methodology, and the very ideas that were passed on. Then the Talmudic scholars, through their effort and their exertion, are able to clarify points that were unclear to them, as in contrast to the Mishnah, where they have more clarity. So there isn't Torah Mamat Lamayla as well, but primarily Torah is Torah Oir. And that's a big emphasis in the Maimer from the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, that it shines. It's a guiding light. It's a guiding light because living in a dark world, as much as a neshama is a divine entity, but it gets concealed once it enters the body and the animal soul, especially the lower levels of the soul. So the soul needs, the neshama needs Torah to guide it. And with Torah comes the Einei Ha'eda, the leaders that teach us Torah. Based on what it says in Torah, they guide the guiding light of how to live our lives and to find the clarity necessary to be able to follow and align our lives with what God wants of us. But then comes another level of the neshama. The root of the neshama is higher than Torah. So once the neshama gets empowered, and you can call it ignited if you wish, or its flames are fanned, then the neshama has plenty to be mashpia to Torah itself. And that's why you find sometimes that Torah is mashpia into neshamas, the places where Teira is considered to be higher than neshamas, like Yisrael Miskashron, Araisa B'Kudsha B'Licha Kula Chad. So Yisrael connects to Teira, and through Teira it connects to Hashem. And then there are the places where it talks about Yisrael Kodma L'Teira, because the neshamas as below, through learning Teira, are mashpia and can be mamshech halakus, even higher levels of Ein Sof, into Teira. And he explained the difference on page 1406. That's what we're middle of. The difference between the Neshamas and Teira, that the Teira is still a tainug, even though it's shashuyim atzmim, meaning it's God's delights and connected with Him entirely, but it's still some substance. He called it epis vos, a geschmack in epis vos. Not the tainug in Atzmus levad, she'ena b'shum dover klal rak ba Atzmus. So Teira is therefore that level of, he calls it tainug hateira, but neshamas and tainug atzmi mamish. And the last piece we learned that the parentheses at the end of the paragraph on page 1406 was he gave the example with a tipa that comes from the moyach ha'av, the drop, the semen, the seed that comes from the moyach ha'av. That's like Teira Chochmah. However, the ikir is the ruach, the spirit. Like we said, the ruach yizru, masha ruach yizru. So then that is the neshamas. And he explained it with the example from the Kutei Teira of a shalheves b'kacheles, that when you have a flame that is concealed or not revealed within a coal, a hot coal, just to use an example here, but so, but that is Teira on its own. When the Eid reads Teira, Kriya b'Teira is similar to someone fanning or blowing on a coal and causing the fire to come alive. And that's the Ruach HaDibur, that's the spirit, that's the breath of speech that draws out Teira from Helam to Gili. That's what neshamas accomplish. Yeah, v'yashlem the ruach ubchinas an neshamas shemavim mashil tesu said b'Teira shelamayla she is galos haTeira. Okay, that's the last piece we learned on page 1406. That's where we stop before the holiday, before Yom Tov, and that's where we shall resume. So again, we're learning about Teira Eir. We began that Teira is Eir, illuminates neshamas, but now we're also learning how neshamas in turn are mashpia and Teira. And that's why, as we shall learn later, the neshamas have the power to go beyond Teira, like he began discussing on page 1403. Now, all this will come together in the context of the Maimer Teira Eir, the Amagbil Sheves, and the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. Once we understand what Teira Eir is in this context with the neshamas, so then we're going to go back to understand Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, Ner Mitzvah, and Teira Eir. So what's the interplay between all those three different elements? When neshamas are the agents that fulfill Teira mitzvahs in this world, but Teira mitzvahs are instruments of divine instruments that give the neshama power to achieve its goals, and they need each other essentially, as we're learning here. But more specific, the difference between mitzvah and Teira we'll learn later, and that which the Rebbe Rashab does not conclude, we'll base it on the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe to understand the entire picture. Okay. So with that said, we're up to the bottom of page 1406. Since it's been a while, if anybody wants, for refresher purposes or any questions that came up over Yom Tov you may have thought of, I'm happy to answer anything before I continue reading. If anybody wants to say anything, please do. If not, we'll start at the bottom of 1406. Okay. The pages can be found if you want to follow the text at ayinbeis.com. So a new paragraph on bottom of 1406. Well, the mashin is boily ill. Now he's taking us back, if you recall, when he spoke about two levels of neshama. Remember he spoke about nefesh, ruach, neshama, then chaya yechida. So on page 1404, basically 2 pages back, the Rebbe Rashab explained that neshama, as it comes down below, that's where it gets concealed and it needs Torah. And that's the meaning that Torah is higher than neshamas. But the neshama, as it's in its root, neshama shenesata be tahirihi. The first part that I just said is ata barasa, ata yitzarta, ata nefachta bi, as the neshama travels through bri, yitzira, and asiya. But neshama shenesata be tahirihi, you remember he said 3 meanings in tahira. Tahira is atzilus, so it's higher than bri, yitzira, and asiya. Higher than that, tahira is ak. In Kabbalah Sarab Chaim Vital, that's the level of ak. But B'mokem Acher, he said Tehiru Ilaah is Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. Like it says, Golav Gelif B'Tehiru Ilaah. And this is the level of the neshama that's not in the category of being manifesting within a body. So this level of neshama is actually higher than Torah. So now he's going to bring it back to understand the context here. How does that fit with this discussion where Torah is mashpia into neshamas, but then the neshamas in turn are reaching the tainaga atzmi, that's even higher than Torah. That's what he's going to now connect that with. So the Fimashin is boiling ill, 2 pages back, on 1404. Masha Omer Tehirihi, that when we say Tehirihi in the davening, in the prayer every morning, Hainu Deshedesh Neshama in B'chinas Tehiru Ilaah, which means the Neshama Neshat be the Neshama you've given me is the level of Tehiru Ilaah, the higher Tehiru. Tehiru means either higher light, higher heaven. Tehiru sometimes Rikiya is compared to Tehiru, but here Tehiru is a higher Tehiru Ilaah. The Hainu B'chinas Ein Sof Shalifnei Tzimtzum. So there we learned, as I said, the highest meaning of Tehiru is Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. So zehu gamken b'b'chinas haprimis va'atzmus the Ein Sof. This level is also what we just referred to, neshama as being higher than Torah. So we said primis ha-Torah, he said, is primis ak. But neshama is even higher, is the level of einig higher than ak. The etzem itself. So he's saying, so when we say Tehiru Ilaah is Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, that's the inner and the core of Ein Sof when we say Lifnei Tzimtzum. Now we have to understand what that means, because based on what he said there, the Zohar says, that the beginning, when the king gave permission or the king's will to create existence, so it says, Gol of Galifi engraved something in the level of Tehiru Ilaah. That seems to be the level, like he said, Esses Firis Sagnuzis. Engraving is a form of defining something. So it's true, it's not yet a definition of actual spheres, but God is so-called allocating resources for what he will need as he Mashir Atzmi B'Kayach. And here he's saying is Primis and Atzmus Ein Sof. So now he's going to come to explain exactly Lifnei Tzimtzum. If you recall, when we spoke about these levels, I said first he's talking about Atzilus, and later he's going to start taking us to higher levels as he goes all the way Lifnei Tzimtzum, because there too there's Torah and Neshamas Yisrael. So when you're talking lower levels, when I say lower, relatively lower levels, you talk Chitzenius Ak, he said the Chitzenius HaTorah, Primius Ak is Primius HaTorah, and Neshamas are even higher than that. You go lower, the same thing with Keser and Atzilus. Tehiru is then the level of Atzilus. But now he's taking us to Lifnei Tzimtzum. Lifnei Tzimtzum, just briefly, is where everything is within the divine consciousness. So it doesn't really yet, nothing exists yet, but Chassidus has taken us so-called under the dashboard into the engine room to telling us we can even connect to how God envisions and begins the process of relating to existence. Even though there is no existence yet, that's why before the Tzimtzum means literally you don't yet have a concealment that allows for an independent consciousness to emerge. But yet, we still talk about an Akhdus, that we can connect to the divine as God is envisioning it all. Think of an architect before he even makes the blueprint, he's envisioning existence in his own vision. In that sense, that's what Torah is a blueprint, is envisioning existence, but Neshamas is even higher than that, as we'll learn now. So he says, there's also Prim Jasmin Commercial Kosov. or commission is boyer probably is the better way of saying this acronym. The Be'er Ein Sof Shalifnei Tzimtzum, in the infinite divine light, the pre-Tzimtzum, yesh beis hamadregas, the Tehiru Ilaah and Tehiru Tataah. So generally speaking, Tehiru Ilaah and Tehiru Tataah, I've definitely spoke about this. There's a footnote from the Rebbe in the Maimer Hecholtzu Tafresh Nun Tes. If any of you ever learned that Maimer from the Rebbe Rashab, the Maimer about Achdus, actually connected to this week's Parsha Noach, because there was the time there was plenty of divisiveness in Lubavitch, in the town of Lubavitch, and the Rebbe Rashab addressed it by saying a Maimer connected. He said it twice. A Maimer that's connected to the idea of unity and the negative implications of disunity or divisiveness. So there in the Maimer he talks about Tehiru Ilaah, and the Rebbe has a footnote there where he discusses that Tehiru Ilaah, Tehiru Tataah are understood on many levels. Like we learned earlier, Tehiru Ilaah is ak according to the Rab Chaim Vital, but in Chassidus it brings that Tehiru Ilaah is before the Tzimtzum. Sometimes Tehiru Ilaah is before the Tzimtzum, Eir Ein Sof, and Tehiru Tataah is Eir Ein Sof after the Tzimtzum. Here he's saying that in places it talks about that in Lifnei Tzimtzum itself there's a Tehiru Ilaah, Tehiru Tataah. Now that shouldn't confuse us because, as I said many times, this isn't a physical map and geography of localities that you can define coordinates as saying they're here and not there. You know, America is not where Asia is, and Asia is not where Africa is. That's in a physical map. But in the spiritual map, everything is much more archetypal and therefore more abstract, and levels overlap, and there are levels, microcosm, macrocosm. So you could have the pratis, you'll say, the general Tehiru Ilaah is in one place, and Tehiru Tataah is after the Tzimtzum, and Tehiru Ilaah before the Tzimtzum. But then you could also say both are after the Tzimtzum, and there's also both before the Tzimtzum. Just like we talk about Atzilus in macrocosm and microcosm. Atzilus and macrocosm is before the Tzimtzum. Atzilus and microcosm is after the Tzimtzum. Because we're talking here about conceptual levels that exist everywhere. In Bria itself, there's an Atzilus, Bria, Yitzir, Asiya. In Asiya, there's Atzilus, Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya. Just like there's Bina and Chochma, and there's Chochma and Bina, there's Skalulus, the interconnectivity that exists. So just keep that in mind always, that levels it may sound contradictory. Suddenly says a certain level, when you learn elsewhere, the level is in one place, and suddenly he's saying it's in a different place. Because the fact is that they really are in all places, and we need to have some structure. So we talk about these names, but they do exist subtly. Before the Tzimtzum, there's a Tehiru Ilaah and a Tehiru Tataah. Tehiru Tataah. Now he's explaining what is that level. Tehiru Tataah b'chinas seva v'makiv haklali de'eir ein sof. When you speak about Tehiru Tataah, you're talking about the level that transcends. Remember, Seva Makiv doesn't mean surrounds, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya. It means it transcends, it's above and beyond. So we call it Seva Makiv, a klali of Eir Ein Sof. And what level is that? That's Ubchinas Igel Hagadol. Shalifnei Hakav. The Igel Hagadol, which is called the great sphere or the great circle. Now, let me just refresh everybody's memory. We spoke about this in the past. We learned about it. But just to keep just to make it, like I said, refresh. When we talk about Eitz Chaim, when he talks about the Tzimtzum, this is the way he puts it: that the beginning meaning conceptual beginning. There's no time. The only thing that existed was divine consciousness, a seamless divine consciousness, like a field of energy. Even though there are levels there, but they're very subtle. If you may recall, I mentioned a letter from the Rebbe in 1949 where he discusses what does it mean levels before the Tzimtzum, and we actually learned it inside here a long time ago. So if you want more information, you can look up that letter. It's printed also in volume 2 of the Rebbe's letters, Igris Kodesh. But bottom line is, in general, we speak about Eir Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum as one seamless divine consciousness. In order to leave room for existence, the Eitz Chaim says, the Arizal says, the Seidat Tzimtzum, like a teacher whose mind is the total expanse of everything is encompassed by his intelligence. But in order to leave room for a student, he recedes, so to speak, he draws back his conscious expression to leave space, and that's called the tzimtzum, the concealment or the receding of the Oir, in order to allow room, what he calls a cholol l'mokem ponei. A chol means a hole, and a mokem ponei is space. So now he actually has an image in Eitz Chaim of this. So think of it like a hole inside, a black hole inside of a big ray of a big circle of light that has receded. So this is obviously not physical and not anthropomorphic. So, but as a physical image, it would be if the sea, for example, covered all of Earth, then the sea draws back and leaves room, space in the center. I don't want to compare it to the whole of a bagel, but it's similar to that idea. However, in the case of a bagel, it's a limited piece of dough. In this case, it's Eir Ein Sof has receded. So if you're able to visualize it physically, it would be Eir Ein Sof within the center, a space that leaving room for something else, so the divine light is concealed. That's what the Tzimtzum accomplishes. Obviously, again, this is all conceptual, not physical. But the fact is we're visual people, so that would be the visualization of it. Then, that's not enough. That just leaves space. The teacher has to now begin to teach the student. But he can't teach him with his whole infinite brilliance, because then you go back to square one. If so-called the waters come rushing back into that space, or the light, the Eir itself comes rushing back in, it defeats the purpose. So what Hashem did was it created a kav, a ray of light that streams, like a stream of light, kav achut it's called, a line and a thread that takes from the Eir Ein Sof that is now surrounding that circle and draws from it into the circle like so-called spoon feeding, step by step, creating existence as we know it. First Ak, and then Akudim, Nekudim, Atzilus, Tikkun, Verudim, Bri, Yitzir, Asiyah, with all the spheres and all the levels within it. So where's the Igel HaGadol? In the Eitz Chaim, he says, once the Eir receded, technically speaking, that's why I go back to the visualization, you have now a circle. Because you have a space in the middle, and the Eir is surrounding it. That Eir is called Igel HaGadol. Why Gadol? Because there are Igulim throughout Ishtalshlus. Igulim essentially is the level of Makif. A circle is essentially a Makif. That's what a circle is. A Kav is Yesher, is a straight line. But an Igul, so there are many Igulim in Atzilus. There's the Igulim of Ak, there's the Igulim of Atzilus, there's everywhere there are Igulim. Igul HaGadol refers to one unique Igul, the big Igul HaGadol, what he calls Makif HaKloli. That Igul HaGadol that surrounds everything, encompasses everything. And from that Igul HaGadol will come a Kav. So he's saying, what's the level of Tehiru Tataah? Is that Igul HaGadol, which is Sevu Makiv, Shalifni HaKav, that precedes the ray of light that will shine from it. The ray of light will come from the Igul HaGadol, but it will only come as a ray, as a thread, as a thin ray, like a laser beam, so to speak, or sometimes we refer to it as an easel. The artist is using an easel to shape and define existence in structural form. So the Kav achieves that. But what precedes the Kav is the Igul HaGadol. I have to keep in mind, again, that's all conceptual in time and in space. It's meant to have to get a picture of how things evolve. Now, using example, the human example, how we do this, that's what we do. When a person teaches, a good teacher will first concentrate his ideas and not allow them to flow and overwhelm the student, and that will create that Igul HaGadol within him. Then from there will become a stream of consciousness, which is the Kav that creates existence as we know it. So bottom line is, the Igul HaGadol he's referring to is Tehiru Tataah, the lower Tehiru. Now, what's Tehiru Ilaah? So he continues. The Tehiru Ilaah, B'chinas Tehiru Ilaah, Harizel L'mayla B'chinas Makav HaKlali. The Tehiru Ilaah is higher than the Makav HaKlali. That's why it's Tehiru Ilaah. So the Makav HaKlali is the Igul HaGadol, but the Eir Ein Sof is not limited to the Igul HaGadol. Igul HaGadol, even though it transcends existence, and that's why it's receded, but it still relates, because the mere fact that you call it an Igul HaGadol means it's a circle. That means the Eir Ein Sof higher than the Igul HaGadol is not even the category of a circle. You can't even call it a Makif. That's like remains completely removed from existence. And that's what he calls Tehiru Ilaah. Ayin Mashakoseh b'shar hatshuva dibra masl achar Hashem telechu perik yudalid. Then just to look at this a mimer from the Mittler Rebbe in Shari HaTshuva, that's a sefer from the Mittler Rebbe, in the mimer called Achri Hashem Telechu, chapter 14. I think when we learned this the first time, I may have probably explained, well, I probably looked it up. I don't remember now what it says there, but I have to look again. But he's telling us to look there, it probably explains this idea. So now, let's take this back to, remember, we want to get this back to Neshamas and Torah. So it's already obvious where he's going with this, but you see here how he's gone to a higher level. Earlier, he was talking about Torah was Ak, and Neshamas was Primius Ak. Then he spoke about Primius Ateiris, Primius Ak, and Neshamas is the Atik above Ak. And now he's taking us Lifnei Tzimtzum, that the Neshamas are the level of Tehiru Ilaah. And obviously the Torah, I'll wait till we read it inside. But before we continue, let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything. He's not finished this topic. So if you want to understand this more, we're going to learn it inside, how this fits with the Neshamas and Torah and so on. But based on what I just said, if anybody wants to ask anything on what I just explained, please.
What is the citation for the mimer you mentioned that talks about the Achdus at this level?
Hecholzu from the Rebbe Rashab.
You know what year?
Tov Reish Nun Tes. That would be 1899.
Thank you.
1898, because it was Noyach. I think it's around chapter 20, maybe, I don't remember exactly where it is. The Rebbe's footnote. I posted a long time ago, probably on our group, but it's a long time, so I probably have to find it again. Yeah. Good.
Is there only one mimer called Hechaltzu by the Rebbe Rashab?
The famous mimer. He may have more than one mimer, but the famous one is Tov Reish Nun Tes.
Okay.
There may be there may be another one, but that's the one that is like we say Hechaltzu from the Rebbe Rashab. It's known, but the year is Tov Reish Nun Tes. If you want, it's also a long one, relatively speaking.
Okay.
If there are other Maimorim, they're shorter.
Thank you.
I can post after the class. I can post the footnote if you want to see the footnote. V'yesh leimer, the last line on page 1406. Shezeu k'may b'chinas atik v'arich. That these two levels, Tehiru Ilaah, Tehiru Tataah, even though we're talking before the Tzimtzum, he says they're similar. They're like Atik and Arich, which of course Atik being like Tehiru Ilaah and Arich like Tehiru Tataah. Or I should say Tehiru Ilaah being like Atik and Tehiru Tataah being like Arich. Yedua, because it's known. The Bechinas Arich hu reisha mokel l'natzolim. Arich, we learned this also on the previous page, the next page, 1407. On 1406, we learned this as well, that Atik is called Atik, Yemen Atik is Netak. It's removed from existence. And Arich is considered Reisha Mokel and Atzolim. Reisha Mokel meaning the beginning, the head, or Reisha Mokel and source of the emanations. V'Atik obchinis tachteina shebemaitzel. And Achli Tachtena Shebemaitzel, he said this on the line 6 on the previous page as well. Tachtena Shebemaitzel. So when we say the Arizal explains that Kesser is the interface between divine and existence, so he says Atik represents Tachtena Shebemaitzel, the lowest level of the emanator, the Mashpia, and Arich is the highest level of the emanations. So when you think of interface, it has to have both levels. That's the difference between Arich and Atik. So Atik is representing Tachtena Shebemaitzel. And he's saying that's Tehiru Ilaah is similar to that. And Tehiru Tataah is similar to Arich. So this connects us back to what we learned earlier, except now we're talking on a higher level. Earlier, we talked about it in the world of Adam Kadmon, or in the world of Kesed, on the top of page 1406. Now on page 1407, the first line, and it's explained elsewhere, the Atik hu loshen hatoka, k'may v'yetiku anshe chiskiyo, dainu hatoka misefer l'sefer. So Atik has several meanings. It means ancient. Atik came in as an ancient. It also means, like I said, netak, removed. But it also comes from the word hatoka. Hatoka means copied. Hatoka, when you copy from one place to another, or you transfer from from one place to another. That's why you'll find that, for example, in Chassidic lingo, hatoka would mean someone copying a mimer that was written by, let's say, the Rebbe, or written by a maitik, a copier, and then rewritten, like a carbon copy in that context. Here, hatoka means a transfer. And he brings v'etiko anshe cheskio, hatoka misefer l'sefer. Like I just said, like a copy when you copy from one book to another. So if you sit and copy one to another, that's called a hatoka. So that means that it's very similar to the original, because it's a copy of the original. Va'inyan l'mayla, that ma'arich, on the other hand, is not a copy of the original. Ma'arich is already associating to the recipient. It's reishel and etzolim. It's already applying itself to give to the emanations. And Atik remains somewhat as a copy, giving us a copy, a type of, if you wish, a DNA sample would be a good way of putting it, of the etzem, of Elikus itself in its purest form. But inyan l'maylahu, what's the inyan l'mayla? Hu b'chinas yiridas ha'atzmus l'ischaber ma'elamis. Just 1 second. Okay, let me first explain it before we read it inside. What he's going to basically say, and this really rounds it out, that lifnei tzimtzum, even though there's nothing yet existent, but in the divine consciousness itself, there are two levels. There's how God is already beginning to Alos HaRatzon. It's arisen in his will and desire to create existence. So there is an association with existence. It isn't existence yet because there's no tzimtzum. But within Ein Sof itself, it's relating to existence. It's like the artist has not yet created the art, but in his mind, he's beginning to envision it. Then there's a level higher than that precedes even that. You can't even say that it associates with existence altogether. And that's going to be the level of Atik and Tehiru Ilaah, where the first level I said is the level of Arich and Tehiru Tataah. That's briefly what he's going to be saying now. But he's going to explain it in practical terms. And the key thing to remember again is what the gift here is that Chassidus is telling us that Hashem is revealing to us how he works within his own so-called consciousness. Because you could say Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum is off limits, something we cannot relate to, because existence cannot exist Lifnei Tzimtzum. That's why there is a Tzimtzum in the first place. And yet, if you recall, we learned this at length in volume 2, God wants a unity that post-Tzimtzum reality should connect to the pre-Tzimtzum consciousness. And to do so, he reveals to us, so to speak, that within his own consciousness, even though he didn't need to do this, but he wanted to do this, firstly, for us to be able to understand somewhat how God works, and secondly, that we should be able to connect to it. So it would be like someone you love deeply, and you know that there's a part of them that remains enigmatic and mysterious. You really can never go there. But still, there's something is revealed to you about their inner workings. So though you can't fully grasp it, but at least it gives you something to hold on to. So in a similar sense, even though we can that God's thoughts are not our thoughts, and he's completely beyond us, but as much as possible, God wanted us to grasp him Again, less machshava tfisa beklal. No thought can grasp him. You can grasp him only with ru'usa deliba, with the desire of the heart. But nevertheless, as much as possible, what Chassidus does is gives us as much as we can to enter these higher realms and inner dimensions. Every person, again, according to their level, obviously, because each of us have a different understanding based on our experience and based on our study and our development and conscious and expanded consciousness and understanding what means lifnei tzimtzum, as we've discussed a number of times. So he's giving us now like this. He says like this: Yeridas ha'atzmus li'schabrim ha'elemus. Say Yeridas ha'atzmus obviously does not mean physically that God is descending. He means that Atzmus is allowing a part of himself to relate to existence. Li'schaber, to bind or connect and bond with the worlds. Not that he's yet a source for the worlds. However, rak so he's speaking about it, you see, in a very subtle way. This being a makal elemis is already, you've already imparted a level of energy that will serve as the energy that will create and sustain existence. Here he's saying we're not yet even on that level. It's only Atzmus has begun the process by wanting existence. There should be a Ratzon. So all we're talking about is the Ratzon here. That Ratzon will become a makal elemis, but Atzmus remains removed from that as well. But we have something that's already now a so-called a source for worlds. So that's the example that would give. So let me go back to the example I gave earlier. Before somebody even envisions wanting to have a home, building a home for themselves or for their family, so they exist completely in their own world, and they're not yet interested in building anything. They're not even thinking about it. They're not even desiring it. It's like you're on your own. You have not yet even conceived of having a relationship with something else. But then in your mind arises what Chassidus calls Alos HaRatzon. Ola b'ritzeinei. In Zohar, you have this expression a number of times. That, like I said, B'reishom nusa demalka, golf gelifa b'Tehiru Ilaah, but sometimes the expression is kadru usa, when God wants something. So the Ola b'ritzeinei. What does it mean, Ola b'ritzeinei? It means there's a state that precedes his wanting it. So before somebody even wants a relationship or wants to build something, there's a state that they're completely removed from that. Then comes the first step is they want it. That's not yet a makal elemis, but the will become a source for existence. Because without a will, you're not going to go build a home. So bottom line is saying, so it's not like a makal elemis, but there's already, it is Atzmus, nimtza b'bchinas, that actually through that Atzmus has come to a point where he's not remaining in his own solitary, so-called exclusive location, but there should be a Ratzon, and that Ratzon will become a makal elemis. So this is where is this before the Tzimtzum? The B'chinas Atzmus Erein Sof. So too in the infinite divine light, the divine consciousness before the Tzimtzum, that in that level of the core Erein Sof, not even considered a source for worlds. We'll soon see the difference. There's a makal elemis. There's a place that's there's a place that's a makal limaker, and then there's not even a makal limaker. But inyan, and the inyan is the b'chinas Alos HaRatzon. Once we say that there's something arose in his desire, she'olah b'ritzeinei is baruch lahaitzil, that it arose in God's will, lahaitzil, to emanate atzilus. Even though it's an Erein Sof pre-Tzimtzum, so you don't yet have existence, that's already at least a makal l'makar, because you're already talking about ola b'ritzeinei. There's a desire that has risen, and there's a level that's not yet even a desire. And remember, these levels exist both right now. It's not once he wants it, the higher level disappears. We have both dimensions of the divine as we speak. B'shir ba'atzmei b'kayach, And what did he do when Allah B'Risene? He allocated, but in the potential state. That's the expression used in Migdash Melech on the Zohar. It's called Shir Atzmei B'Keach. So shir can mean measured, like a shiur, to measure in his own so-called. Think of again, the architect is now envisioning, wants to have a existence. He wants to have a building, but he doesn't have a building yet. So the first thing he has to do is allocate resources. So he measured in his own mind, ba'atzmei b'keach, shir ba'atzmei b'keach, kol ma she'osed li is b'peil. Everything that will come in the future, everything that will be created and emanated, I should say, Atzilus, he's now shir atzmei, so-called measuring within himself. Kol ma she'osed li is b'peil achar tzimtzum, I should have added. So everything that will come after the tzimtzum, before the tzimtzum, in the Olah B'Ritzena, there's the level of shir atzmei b'keach. And that too has many levels, just for the record. You may recall the end of volume 2 in Ayin Beis, and then we learned it in Sadik Dalet from the Frierdiker Rebbe, Tofrei Sadik Dalet. He spoke about a number of levels of how we get from Ratzon to shir atzmei b'keach. But generally speaking, think of it, once it desires, the next step would be allocating or measuring what he will need in order to build everything that will come after the tzimtzum. Then there's Atzmus Ein Sof, Kedem Alos HaRatzon. Then there's the Core Ein Sof prior to this Alos HaRatzon. Alos HaRatzon is already at least a mocker le'elamus, because he already desires it. Then there's a level prior to will. Ein Gam B'chinas mocker le'mocker, and that level is not even a mocker le'mocker, because you can't even talk about it as relating to existence, even the most removed way. That's what the only thing you could talk about it, that there's Yeridus Hamshachas Atzmus. Atzmus has now moved to a place that so from there will come a Ratzon. So one thing has, so there's Atzmus that's not even, we can't even call him not being a Makar L'Makar. Then there's a place that's not a Makar L'Makar, but it's already ready that will become a Makar L'Makar through the Ratzon. He's sending us to Maimer Tofreis Ayin Zayin. So here clearly we see the Rebbe Rashab wrote this. This is already after Ayin Beis. This is already talking about Tofreis Ayin Zayin. That would be the year. I involved is 1916, 1917. Where he talks about Sheresh Hashroshim. I'm going to stop here, but he's going to say these two levels that we just discussed before Kedem Alos HaRatzon and Alos HaRatzon, that's going to be the two levels of Tehiru Ilaah and Tehiru Tataah. And then he's going to bring us back to Neshamis and Teira. First Neshamis and that Teira. But I think I'll stop here, and tomorrow I'll continue that these are the two levels of Tehiru Ilaah, Tehiru Tataah, and back to the Neshamis. I just want to make sure we do it in a more paced fashion. So bottom line is, you see, he's taking us all the way lifnei tzimtzum and explaining us in the inner divine consciousness the process of going from a place that's completely removed to a place that's removed, but not entirely, that descends. Then there's a Ratzon, that's a Mocker L'Mocker, and then there's a Mocker, and then there's actual existence. All these are the process, the levels in the process of creation. Now, you may wonder, why do we need to know all this? Let's remember, if you want to have a full interface between us and the divine, we don't just want to connect to the divine as he relates to us. We want to connect to the divine as he relates to himself. We want to connect to Atzmus as he's beyond existence. So this is the opportunity to do so, that God is allowing us, like he said, a copy of what he's like, not just as he relates to us, because you could have argued, we let's relate to God as he relates to us, and that's it. And the rest of it beyond us remains completely removed and inaccessible. But Chassidus doesn't want that. Chassidus wants the interface to be complete. And here's where the Neshamis and Teira obviously come into play, because Teira will give us an experience of the divine on a very high level, and it reveals it to us. And the Neshamis will then reveal even something deeper and higher. That's what we're addressing here. The way we connect and to what levels we can connect to. So this is quite fundamental piece, obviously, in the whole big picture of Ayin Beis. and esteem of interface. But I'm going to stop here at this line here on page 1407. Happy to take any questions. But remember, regarding the Shamas and Teda, especially in the Shamas, is going to come the next part of this page, which we'll learn the next year. Go ahead. Anybody wants to comment or question anything? Okay. Okay, so we'll stop here. A third of the way down, page 1407.